Hello and welcome. It's wonderful to see you again, and it's time to talk about all things business. You're with the Economic Times, and my name is Ashutosh Sinha. It's a pleasure to be with you and welcome you to this conversation. The Economic Times and Sophos presents this conversation, creating the 24/7 trust environment. So important to talk about it. It's a burning topic. And it's a burning topic, as I mentioned, to discuss because businesses around the world have been hit by security worries in the last year or two, mostly coinciding with the lockdown, although this trend began early as well. And today, I'm joined by my colleague, Namrata Doshi from Mumbai. Both of us will work together and speak to you and coordinate this conversation. Namrata, welcome.
Thanks, Ashutosh. It's a pleasure to join you. And I totally agree with you. The last 2 years have been very challenging for people working from home and organizations dealing with cyber threats, ransomware, and more. While you were speaking a minute ago, the first two things that came to my mind were the cases of SolarWinds and Colonial Pipeline. I think people can relate to it. With that, Ashutosh, the crisis has hit home so close and in such a big way that during 2021, more than 11.5 lakh incidents of cyber attacks were reported by the country's CERT, which is the Computer Emergency Response Team. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, 2020 and 2021 have not been easy. And you mentioned about that number, 11.5 lakh incidents. That's huge. And who would forget, in 2020, that power outage in large parts of the country, and Maharashtra was badly hit. And because of what India faced, there was a suspect. And the suspect was a malware in the power transmission servers that was suspected. Namrata, if you remember that?
Yes, absolutely. Who can forget that? And that is why I think this subject needs more deep dive than we think it needs. Organizations and companies need enhanced infrastructure for security and for their employees. I think it's time to introduce our speakers today. Why don't we start, Ashutosh?
Sure. So how can businesses, well, while this is the broad sense of it, how can businesses build that 24/7 trust environment? It's something very amorphous. And that's the term we are using, 24/7 trust environment. To discuss the various aspects of the topic, we have a stellar set of people joining us today. Let me introduce them to you. We have Ram Singampalli, COO Hexaware. Welcome, Ram. We have Piyush Rajiv Ajmani. He's Senior VP and Global Chief Digital Officer at Wellspun India. Piyush, welcome. We have Kishan Manjunath, Director Cybersecurity at Honeywell. Kishan, welcome. And I should also introduce Manu Putumana, and he's VP Cyber Defense Services at Mphasis. Namrata, who are the others who we have today?
Welcome, Ram. Welcome, Piyush, Kishan, and Manu. And the list doesn't end here. We have more impressive people joining them. We have Aditya Vardhan, who's the AVP and Head for Cybersecurity and Risk at Westcorp. Welcome, Aditya. We have Alok Kumar Dani, who's the partner at Deloitte India. Pleasure to have you, Alok. And finally, John Scher, who's a Senior Security Advisor with Sophos. Welcome, all of you. And before I hand it over to you, Ashutosh, let's remind the viewers, there is a Q&A tab at the bottom. You can see it on your screen. If you have questions, please go ahead and pour them in. Our viewers and our panelists will be happy to answer them. And we will also have 2 poll questions. Ashutosh will dive right into it. Over to you, Ashutosh.
Yeah, that'll come a little later. The Q&A will come a little later, but then as Namrata mentioned, you must take part in the polls and offer your opinion on the questions that will come in. But to start the proceedings, let me first request Alok Kumar Dani from Deloitte to set the context for the conversation. Alok, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Ashutosh. Pleasure meeting everyone. Good afternoon. I hope everyone is doing good and staying safe. Now, this is such an interesting topic, and let me quickly introduce myself. I am a cybersecurity services partner with Deloitte. I'm in this domain for the last 18 plus years, serving both USA and India subcontinent market. It's a very interesting topic. If you look at especially the last 2 years, the dynamics of cyber attacks have changed so much. Now everybody has embraced working remote. In fact, I know so many organizations who never ever let people work remotely also have embraced remote working, right? I mean, digitalization, the kind of quotient that has increased in the index of digitalization is maybe catapulted to the next level. So kind of, COVID has also held in embracing digital world from all different organizations, different schools of thought, whatever existed before. I think it has rubbed that off, and now everybody is embracing digital world. Obviously, the benefits come with their own cost, and cybersecurity is, I would say, one of the aspects that a lot of times I have seen organizations overlooking at it initially because they think it's okay. I mean, we'll just embrace IT without cybersecurity, and then later they run into challenges, and then comes the security budget, which otherwise would not be there from the beginning. All right. So all these combination of problems I have seen. What is very interesting is, like, I have heard initially the panelists speaking about the last 2 years. So if you look at last 2 years, all right, both the years in the month of December, highest amount of tension was there in cybersecurity world. First, in 2020, when the solar winds broke down, I can tell you we had to call everybody back to work. All right, it was like a mayhem. And this year, when people expected, all right, things were okay, again, the history repeated, and then we had Log4j. All right, and again, it was like chaos all over. All right, now, if you look at the trend for the last few years, compare it to the last 2 years, the last 2 years stand apart. I mean, they stand out. The volumetrics are at least 3x. So every year we release a report from my organization in terms of state of cyber attack. And it's like, there are two towers for the last 2 years which stand out. It's 2x, 3x of the number of attacks which have happened. So I'll just take a couple of minutes in terms of the context. It's such an interesting context and so close to my heart in terms of this is the conversation I keep having day in and day out, and this is what we do for a living. So now 2021, from cybersecurity perspective, the year ended with Log4j. I mean, I don't have to tell any one of you. Everybody knows what exactly this is. This is just for a visual representation for us to connect to the context of the problem. And then what I want you to look at is, see, nobody got spared. If you look at the vendors, whether it is SaaS, whether it is custom applications which got developed, whether it is any top company that you look at, which are in the Fortune 100, invariably everybody has got impacted. All right. The biggest problem was people were saying where not is Log4j. It is everywhere. I mean, like, they have lost the count of applications that uses this framework. And I'm also a big fan of Log4j. I mean, I come from Java J2E background, have done development for 8-10 years. I still do a lot of such work. And this invariably by default would be the framework we would use for logging. All right. So this was a big problem. I'll not go into the solution area. That is for all the experts and all to discuss. But then this is one of the problems. Again, if you look at last year, whatnot, I mean, I heard about the colonial pipeline that stands out. We heard about that electric power supply problem at Maharashtra. Now, what also stands apart is the kind of attack sophistication quotient has increased. If you look at last year, Kasaya attack. Now, supply chain sort of attacks is something which has started happening in the last 2 years. So we call it like the 5th generation aircraft fighter pilots. I mean, they get trained for the 5th generation fighter planes. Similarly, now I think there's a 5th generation of attacks where it is a supply chain attack. Never ever one would have thought about SolarWind in terms of how the SolarWind has transpired. And the same thing got repeated with Kasaya. Kind of, not exactly, but kind of. All right, in that way, I mean, you in one go infect and put at ransom hundreds of organizations together at the same time. State-sponsored attacks and all different kind of attacks we have seen, especially in India. There are certain APT groups we have seen have become so relevant in the last 2 years. APT 6, 8, 30, 36. These are the 4 that we track very closely. Almost on a weekly basis, we make sure that we are tracking them and making sure we are helping organizations stay safe. All right. So with this context, I would say let's have a discussion how we can defend, how we can prevent, how we can maybe share information between all of us. Maybe there are so many different ideas. So let's discuss. This is only the tip of the iceberg, not that I have been able to do justice to this topic in few minutes, but then it's too important for all of us as an economy, as a country to discuss and defend ourselves, all right? Especially when we and that reminds me, in the last 2 years, you would notice every time there was an increased intention in the Southeast business community of the countries, the attacks would increase. All right. So that's again something very, very important. All right. The kind of attacks. And I deal with incident response, which is so sensitive. When we come to know about the motive of attacks, and sometimes you can't even imagine the motive that was there for an attack. All right. So I'll give you one example. Again, because it was a state sponsored attack. One of the countries wanted to get the price list of certain items which India is exporting. So they tried to do that attack at different ministry levels and all. They could not. Then they got it from one of the airports. So they attacked an airport because the airport would also have that price list in the customs team. So that is how, I mean, you would not imagine somebody attacking an airport, but the intention is not to damage the airport, but to get the list of that export list or items, at what rate India is buying from where, which countries are permissible, not permissible. So these are the kind of things that happen. Very interesting topic. I'll take a pause now. Over to you, Ashutosh. Let's discuss.
Okay, so quite a context setting, because sometimes unless you understand the intent, the action, sometimes you probably are missing in the context. So thanks a lot, Alok, for putting things in perspective for us. Now that you have helped clear some of that fog, we'll try and break into the conversation. We'll try and break the conversation into different parts, let's say. First, about how we can build the trust from the word go. This applies to smaller companies or companies which are in the early stage. Then how they try and enhance the trust as organizations grow. And then finally, trying to understand some of the best practices. Well, the third one I would imagine is easier said than done. Of course, there'll be some audience questions as well. And Namita mentioned a little while ago, there'll be a couple of polls as well, which we'd want you to take part in. So let's start with the questions. And let me ask maybe, Piyush, if you can take this one. As businesses are built on trust and, that they are able to win from their customers, that's the core of business. For some sectors, that is, it's very critical. Online commerce, banks, financial services. How can neobanks, financial services companies and others, and somewhere where businesses are critical for operations of businesses, how do you build that trust environment from the word go?
Yeah. So first of all, good afternoon, everybody, and nice to be part of this panel discussion. I hope everybody is staying safe. And as Alok was saying, it's a very interesting topic because now, like we've been looking in the COVID third wave, it's reaching our houses. So in a way, the whole cyber security point is also reaching to our houses in a way, because we are all connected in this environment of 24/7. So this trust basically comes to us as individuals also. And then we extrapolate it. It also comes in the ecosystem that we operate, which is the organizations like we work with. So I think fundamentally the point here is that, it's not about an individual or an individual company who can do a lot. It's an entire ecosystem which we are part of. When we look at all these attacks, what has happened in the last year, even right now, we're looking at the whole diplomatic attacks which are happening in Ukraine and all. So it's kind of a fundamental 360-degree view that we need to look into. And everybody has to play a part here. So I think from a perspective of creating this trust, a very important aspect is, how do you build that kind of a knowledge and impart that knowledge across the stakeholders? And that is what I believe we should, as enterprises, should emphasize on. And that's what we are doing. And I think the other aspect is, what are the motives against which you are vulnerable to these attacks, right? So if you look at predominantly, there are three parts to it. As we were talking about, mostly it's about ransoms, which comes in to play. The second part is the whole social engineering bit. How do you basically millage the images of people, organizations, aspects around it? And how do you really get into through one organization into multiple organizations and penetrate into those layers? And I think the final thing is also about the information leakage. So, and it depends on company to company. So like if you talk about my company per se, so, we are into textiles. We also serve the top big retailers of the world, when you go to different geographies. So for us, it's very important to maintain the critical information that we have from our customers, the designs, and also, how do we really create all these assets in a secure environment when our employees are working from home? And, how do you really build those kind of a checks and balances? I think we'll talk more about it, but I think the whole point here is to build the cyber resilience.
Oops, looks like we have, no worries. We'll try and get across to Piyush in just a bit. Let me add that to add that part of the conversation and get Ram Singapalli in. Ram, when you work with companies who are looking to build the early stage of the trust environment, how would you, what does your experience say with customers?
I think again, thank you for opportunity to be part of the panel. I think Piyush and Alok already spoke about what it takes to build the ecosystem. It is not just the organization, but employees and the surrounding ecosystem that comes along with it. I think the first and foremost for any organization to recognize that this is part and parcel of critical business function, right? And it is not an independent something that would come and add on to it later, but it is part and parcel of it. Even if it is a very small business that runs their own employees' payroll and they carry the bank account, so on and so forth. So organizations shouldn't think that they don't have much of a confidential information. Every organization today, even if it is a company with 10 people, 20 people, keeps a lot of information that needs to be protected because it belongs to their employees, their customers. So there are regulatory requirements, right? Privacy, security.
Sorry, Ram, you seem to have gone on mute by mistake. No worries.
Sorry, I move my hands. So
no worries.
I think that each business needs to recognize that cybersecurity is part and parcel of running their business. So that's the first thing that organizations we ask to recognize and say, from the senior management, they need to make a statement that every function should consider cybersecurity as part of their responsibility. Right? That starts from the cultural point of view. Then the next part is to make sure that the organizations invest into right technology solutions aggressively to make sure that cybersecurity is implemented across the functions. Right. So the second part is to make sure that we have enough investments into technology to do that. And third thing is important is to coach and train employees about the cybersecurity. Right? People maintain things in Excel. In an organization, it doesn't mean that they can get things done by doing it in Excel locally. But what kind of security issues that they can get into? You heard from Alok pointing it out. Somebody having information in an airport actually allows somebody to get to the airport and steal it. So, the third part that I would say is the employee education plays a very critical role as a third step into it. So, if I were to summarize it, make sure that the management recognizes cybersecurity is part of the business function, and you make the right investments and coach employees to be well educated on cybersecurity. This is the words.
Okay, thanks a lot for that input. And I think we lost Piyush in between. So if Piyush, you have something to add here, we're happy to hear quickly.
Yeah, sorry for the network issue. So yeah, I think what Ram was saying, I completely agree. And that's what organizations have to emphasize, how to build this whole cyber resilience into the ecosystem, where now cybersecurity is dealt like more of a business problem. It has to be inbuilt into the processes. And that's why we have to evolve. And there are multiple things, I've seen organizations working on, especially now from the day one, when we look at any new project services coming in, there's a very strong scrutiny in terms of the cybersecurity measures, which we need to build into. And I think we have to keep evolving on that. Yeah.
Absolutely. I completely agree, Ram and Piyush. Thank you so much. Companies are achieving early success, especially smaller companies. Keep in mind, for them, customer trust, customer satisfaction is more important than ever before. And with that, companies are trying to spend more and more time understanding how to get these environments in place, what are the technologies and solutions they can build. We also need to look at what are some of the ways in which companies can identify and protect from the unwanted and, should I say, relentless cyber attacks. I mean, I have to say, with COVID not ending, first wave, second wave, third wave, it feels like in the cyber world, we keep having these first attack, second attack, and we have to remember it doesn't end. It's going to come back. Organizations need to be ready to face it. So, what are some of the ways that companies can identify and protect the unwanted? Maybe, John, you can throw some light here, being an expert in this area.
Certainly, and thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of this, you have to start at the beginning. So you have to start with how do you prevent things from happening in the first place? I think a lot of us have swung, in security specifically, have swung very far to let's just respond, detect and respond to events. But let's not forget why we started this industry, and that was to prevent things from happening in the first place. And the way you do that is with sensible policies and sensible defaults, right? So as you're deploying networks, as you're deploying endpoints, as you're deploying servers and services, make sure that you're doing so in a way that has security at the forefront of what you're doing, that you're building security. And I heard a couple of panelists say that already, building security in and getting the stakeholders to buy in as well. One of the things that I read about the other day, I saw a headline, which is, the CEOs think they're secure, whereas the CTO knows they're not, right? So there's this disconnect in a lot of organizations where the perception is, well, we must be secure because we spent all this money on some great security stuff. But unless you implement it properly, unless you have the policies around how you manage people and how you manage your services, that's not going to happen. And then you build on top of that things like threat intelligence. So you got to know what's going on out there. You got to understand what are the bad guys doing, and then how can you protect against those kinds of things. And then that translates into people resources like the Security Operations Center. And if we start looking at the different business sizes out there, small businesses probably don't have a security operations center, but they can go to a managed SOC scenario. So they can have these services managed for them. They can enjoy the same things that the big guys have at a smaller scale that will protect them just as well. And that, as we move down the path towards security maturity, which is really what we're talking about here, the more capability you have, the more recognition of your footprint and what's happening, you become a more mature organization in the security context. And so you start doing things like threat hunting. So Log4j is a great example, because not only did we, collectively as an industry, we took care of the outward facing problem quite well. It was like the Y2K problem. All of us got together, we cleaned up the externally facing services, but how many internal servers are still vulnerable, and how many of those servers will actually get used by pen testers and attackers alike going forward? And that's where threat hunting can go in. You can start looking into your network a little bit deeper into some of the dark corners, looking for things that might be lying in wait. And then that introduces tools that you use for that kind of thing, like XDR. And then finally, a response plan, right? So we've gone from one end to the other now, from anticipating and preventing to responding. And the response plan is really key. And it's important that you have something in your pocket in case something happens. And it has to be somewhat tailored to the event. So if you've got to have one for ransomware, you should have one for disaster recovery from a fire, for example. You should have one for a server outage, and you should have one for maybe a business email compromise scam. But more importantly, you need to test them, and then you need to adjust when you find gaps in that plan.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, John. What he's saying is you need to have something ready in your pocket, a go-to strategy. If you can help us here, Aditya, what do you think, and how should companies approach building systems and processes in place so customers can feel comfortable and trust, in building a strong foundation?
Hi, Anamrata. First of all, thank you very much for allowing to be part of this conversation. So I think, considering the way systems are evolving now, and after this pandemic-led growth of cloud and then democratization of connecting from work from home, I think it's more than ever, it's very, very important that we are going through a proper framework, right? So putting in boxes independently and not going to work, those have to be driven by certain framework, and which is taking care of all the different layers. the threats what we have around identity, the threats what we have around data, then sitting on the secure infrastructure, and on top of that, the detection layer of it. All those things have to come together. And I think one of the fellow panelists already said the incident response has to be very, very important part of it. Okay. Another thing what we are seeing from a customer confidence standpoint is how we are demonstrating the continuous improvement journey, and also bringing in the objectivity to what we are reporting to customer, right? So what we are also seeing is that customers are basically, they are acknowledging if we are, instead of saying them that we stand today in terms of high, medium, low, are we able to give them certain numbers in terms of our risk score, okay? And kind of the trend what we are able to project to our customer. And then obviously the process becomes the integral part of it, considering the way, there are different things and the different moving parts, which are coming in. So I think these are important aspects, what allow us to get connected with the customer, give them a confidence, and then as just to re-emphasize, the setting up a tone for a continuous improvement for our customers, the way they are connecting with us.
Okay. Manu, I'd like to understand from you the way the challenges are happening, the way if I may say so, the target is changing, the target of, as we began, the 24/7 trust environment, that requires to address that. It requires a very deep understanding of the operational challenges that companies have faced in the past as well. Give us a sense of what goes into building that.
Okay, so the challenges that companies have faced are different way. I mean, different type. Foundationally, if you since we are talking about the trust and trust associated challenge, trust is an interesting concept, right? And in the last few years in the industry, it has gained a lot of significance, especially in the cybersecurity world. And some of my fellow panelists already alluded to it. But then I would like to take a different perspective to it, to throw light onto the challenges that companies have faced, and why so. See, humans have a tendency to trust. If you look backwards, not in the technology world, even the mighty Troys failed because they trusted what Romans left for them, right? So trust issue is not something recent. Now, and because of that tendency to trust, a lot of our solutions were built with certain level of assumed trust. That we trust the people who are accessing them. We trust the applications. We trust the infrastructure. Trust is there in the system. That is how systems were designed. And one example in the physical world I would like to quote is right from the postcard that we all used to send in the snail mail as we know it now. You can send a postcard to anybody, mimicking the source address to be someone else, right? There was no way to authenticate from whom it came. It would look very genuine. And when we implemented the snail mail into email, that fundamental flaw was implemented in the technology level also. If you go into the protocol level, there were no ways of authenticating the source when the mail started. Now there are ways of doing that. So assumed trust has always been a core of the problem associated with the topic that we are discussing. Now, and that has and this assumed trust is what in almost all cases attackers have exploited in executing a successful cyber attack. And how do organizations address that? How can organizations address that? Some of the points were already discussed, but I'll take a step back from there. The first step is to get the foundation right. And what I mean by foundation is like what Aditya said. We need to have every organization need to have the topmost level of management recognizing that cyber is a challenge, and and their involvement and commitment is there.
Mhm.
And then second is to have appropriate investment to have in people, process, and technology for cyber defense. Often we see very disproportionately low money being spent on cybersecurity, and once these two elements are there, the third element of the foundation is to use these two and establish a risk-centric cybersecurity program, or risk management-centric cybersecurity program, which is a business enabler rather than an impediment. So it's a question every organization needs to ask: do they find their cyber program as an impediment to business or an enabler? I remember a recent conversation where someone said, cybersecurity is like the brakes of your car. So what I mean by that is, of all the accessories that you have in an automobile, it is the brakes that allow you to go faster, not anything else, right? That's the significance of it. And beyond what my colleague said, because of the changes that the industry is seeing in terms of adoption of digital transformation, as well as the changes that we are being forced into by the pandemic, one key shift that we are seeing in the industry is an adoption of what is called a zero trust. Now, it may feel that 24. We are discussing on 24/7 trust, and I'm referring to something called zero trust. But I believe zero trust is the way to, or the 24/7 trust environment will be based on the principles of zero trust. Okay. I hope the discussion would lead into more discussion of zero trust. So I don't want to get into those details at this point. I think broadly, this is how organizations can address these challenges.
Okay, Manu. So interesting that you've mentioned about that assumed trust as well, because Kishan, I'd like to understand from you, with rapidly evolving technology, how can the largest companies stay up to date with something which is as amorphous as that? And I'm also asking in the context of the zero trust that Manu referred to. Kishan.
Right. Just to add to Manu, implementing zero trust would require a more comprehensive vision and plan across the organization, and we would have to prioritize milestones based on the business priorities. So it's a journey. So it's not something that can be just solved by throwing technology, and it's not something that you can solve within, that can be solved over a few months, or it takes time. So I come more from a product development background, and we have SaaS offerings that we deliver to our customers, large enterprise customers. And the principles of zero trust, like verify explicitly, like you don't assume that a person's identity, once it's authorized, is good enough to access any resource in the environment, right? So we do strongly enforce that, because we have a lot of customers' IoT data in our environment, and customers really care about how we are protecting data. So having something like micro-perimeter kind of an architecture, micro-segmentation, and ensuring that at every point we do validate who the person is, whether they have the right level of access or not. Those kinds of, sorry, my thing keeps going off.
Okay, no worries.
So validating, authenticating, authorizing at every access point, especially when you're trying to access customer data, is important. We don't assume trust, to Manu's point. There are things like, in addition to that, we also have continuous monitoring, continuous auditing that we have implemented to ensure that we, on a regular basis, on a weekly basis, daily basis, monthly basis, we can audit and validate that only the authorized people have access to the data. All access is through APIs. So there are architectural elements to it that you can implement from a product point of view purely. But it also extends to how you would set up your network, your IT infrastructure, how do you validate devices that connect. Do you have mechanisms in place to ensure that they are running the right level of OS, right level of patches, things like that, right? So just extending on that to this whole topic of customer trust. So I will take Log4j as an example. So we have a focus on building on compliance and customer trust, right? So we do a lot of various things. Compliance could be as simple as getting a SOC 2 audit done, right? And then we have white papers, we have certain publications that we provide to our customers to give them the confidence that once they give us the data, it is only accessed by authorized users. There is no way malicious software or a non-authorized user can get to the data, right? But Log4j was a good example. So it kind of validates that our systems work. So one was detection, right? So it came around December 9th. So most of our automated scanning tools, etc., the signatures would not have been updated at a point in time, let's say. But we also do monitor external like cert inputs, etc. So how quickly you can get to know about a zero-day attack is important. So once you get to know that you have this problem, identifying where all this problem exists is also important. So that means that you need to have a good configuration management database, an asset database, identify the owners who need to take the next level of actions, right? Then similarly, if you have a good patching cadence, a lot of these Log4j issues could be resolved through patching. So we went from our old versions of Log4j to 2.15 to 2.16, and now a lot of them are on 2.17, right? That's because of how good your patching strategy is. And then we also do a lot of supplier risk assessments management. So we use a lot of third-party software, right, which also has Log4j. So how do you track that and update it? So we went through this whole exercise, and we have a lot of customers whom we had to notify and give them updates, right? So the fact that we could do all this and demonstrate that we didn't get impacted and their data, more importantly, their data didn't get impacted, there's no exfiltration of data, etc., also helps build a trust. So it's not a good thing to have an incident like this, but then you take the best we make the best use of that incident, right?
Make the best use of the opportunity. Pretty much.
Yes. Yep.
You've said it. You've said it. Okay, just to remind that the questions we'd expect you, if you want your questions answered by one of the experts, if you could put in your questions in the Q&A tab, it'll be wonderful. Some are already coming in, and we expect more of you to put in your questions. It's time now for the first poll for the day, and let's get ready. That's on it. That's the question before you on the screen. For information security, what's the most important factor for trust? And you have to make one choice. Now, interestingly, all the speakers, Namrata and I, we can't make a choice. So the choice is yours. And, you see one of those points, the point D, which says non-repudiation, that just in simple words means that, when one side is sending data to the other, neither side can deny that data has been sent or received. So we'll expect you to answer. You can just choose one of those four, and the answers will pop up on the screen any minute for you, and we wait for your answers. It's very important that we get your responses as well, because the speakers will also get a sense of the people, how they are thinking, because we're talking of something which is so important in the last year or two, and this has been discussed so often. And your views matter as well, because if you're interested in the topic, you would also be interested in the poll. So look at that. Look at that. Off the responses, and that's just off the sample size we're talking about. Confidentiality comes at the top, almost half the audience. And the other more important thing is data integrity. Well, some of these other factors are smaller. So something to keep in mind for us as we move ahead, gentlemen. And Namrata, why don't we move ahead with the next set of questions?
Thank you, Ashutosh. Confidentiality is what people want more, but I think data integrity is equally important, and that's what brings us to our next segment, let's try and understand how companies are dealing with building processes and adapting them, which were built in the early part of the business. So Piyush, maybe you can help us here. How is it that India is dealing with the issue of talent? Like, when talking about these issues and having to resolve them, do we have the expertise that we need, and are companies ready to face that?
Yeah, I think that's a very relevant question, because if you see today, the demand of cybersecurity professionals is humongous, and while we look at the demand, the supply is quite minimal, and even in the supply, the quality of the professionals is quite limited. I think so far, we have also seen in the industry from an enterprise standpoint, it's very important that we have the right professionals who come in and work, but it's very difficult also to retain them. I think that is where a lot of help comes in from specialist firms who basically engage with companies to really build the entire ecosystem, because I think there is no point in reinventing the wheel. I think a lot of things is being already done by the specialist service providers, the firms, the product partners. Is important you engage with the right companies so that they can bring in those parameters, those policies, those frameworks to basically align it to the bigger enterprises. And within the enterprises, you should have few people who should have a very strong view on cybersecurity. Rest is all about kind of creating an ecosystem where you can build bring in the set of specialists. And I'm sure that when you look at the specialist firms also who are dealing in, and my colleagues and panelists are playing those critical roles there, they can throw further light on it. I'm sure the talent scarcity, the retention of the talent, even the quality of the talent, and building that kind of a competency is very important, because we are racing against time. It's not that it's a kind of a couple of years back, it was a standardized framework, I would say, the way we look at cybersecurity, and the pace at which it was evolving and the whole continuous improvement that we talked about was not that fast as it is today, because you're fighting a battle in the battleground, right? So the way you have to really evolve the competency also is going up. So I think that's a very big challenge which I see.
Thank you for that, Piyush. Now that the point is clear, let's understand from Alok. Alok, what do you think, assuming that companies are having the intent and the budget to build a robust system in place, what do you think are the most common mistakes companies are making, or organizations are missing out? What are those points?
Yeah, very interesting. So see, this is what I do for a living. So I mean, like, I keep interacting with so many customers and prospects who have bought certain great tool technologies, but then buying it doesn't make them secured. I heard one of the panelists also say the same thing, right? I mean, you may have invested in a tool technology, but then how good has the tool got implemented, deployed? I mean, who's monitoring it, managing it from security perspective, right? I mean, look at anything, there is cybersecurity an element that is always going to be there. So one of the analogies in cybersecurity that we have used in the past is like cybersecurity is the same what is salt in food. A food could be great, but something which is so, you pay so much, but then just a 2 rupee salt, if you miss, you would not like that worth 1,000 rupee food. So that's the exact same analogy I would say goes in for IT. Wherever IT goes, cybersecurity has to follow. They complement. It's not like proportional to the value of salt and expensive food. Obviously, that was just an analogy. So we need the right level of services in terms of making sure the entire infrastructure is secured, application is secured, whatever you may choose. All right. We are doing some very interesting work. I mean, helping customers secure their scooters. There's electric scooters, electric cars which are coming out. All right. Again, they have to be very secure. They all use connected car technology. All right. So, like I said, salt goes for any kind of food that we take. Cybersecurity goes for any kind of IT that we consume. Whether it is on the mobile, laptop, it is anywhere. A cybersecurity element is always there. All right, and leave it to the experts. I think, make sure that it's not like only buying the tool will keep you secured. My suggestion would be always make sure you do periodic assessments, posture check in terms of where you are. All right, because again, the situation is very dynamic. What is good today may not be good after 1 year. You should not be like, all right, I'm very secure today. I have got it done by the best organization, but then still do a maker check, get somebody else to do maybe a periodic check, and then put a roadmap for next 3 years. I don't think we have visibility now beyond 3 years. All right. And gone are the days when we used to do 5-year planning and all. Even 3 years is very challenging. So that would be my suggestion.
Okay, I am not even sure if 3 years, a lot of people would be ready to predict. You don't know beyond, people are struggling with the year 2022.
Absolutely.
So let's try and get Ram's point of view on this. Ram, with the kind of expansion that we're seeing on, some of those products that are coming in the market across categories, across devices, across networks. So, for example, all the electric vehicles, the connected part of it, devices that you're seeing, how does that impact companies and how does that increase the risk? What are you telling companies?
I think the more technology that we consume, Alok just mentioned, the more you're vulnerable, right? Each IT consumption would increase your vulnerability. That's why I think the mindset has to be every place an organization engages, every device, every partner, every interface that you connect with any other part of the organization is vulnerable, and that needs to be seen with an eyes of this is vulnerable, and we have a responsibility to secure it, and we have a responsibility to make sure that nothing unwanted happens. So every technology that for example, a retailer would say you have online shopping that opens up organization for vulnerability. But imagine what organizations would try to venture into virtual reality, right? You want to have shops to be opened up in much more in a realistic fashion, not on your device, but on a virtual reality device. So what would happen to security, right? So every time that we speak to our customers, number one, organizations wants to digitize and adopt these technologies, right? That's part of evolution in the business that happens. So you can't slow down the business. But at the same time, if you adopt the security solutions that go along with it appropriately, one, you'll be able to move the business to the new technologies, and two, you should be able to secure it. Right? So as we had earlier, one of our fellow colleagues said, hey, this is the brakes. Security is like a brakes that allow you to go faster. The brakes are important because when you see a ditch and if you are unable to brake at the right time, you could have with an accident that's unwanted. Right? So that's how it needs to be seen. So as much as we are building the technologies, we need to build those brakes that are required to do it. So that's how we look into it. And I think the two important philosophical things that we tell people, keep in mind that you behave like you are as if you are a defense organization. Defense organizations are very good at thinking that they are all going to be attacked by their enemy any day. Right? That's the mindset they inculcate. So that's what we keep telling people, right? So one of the ways that we do is, for example, when we wanted a security framework a couple of years back, we said, we will take an NIST CSF framework, which is the defense organizations do, right? So having the mindset of defense organizations is one of the ways to, yes, the defense takes a little longer to adopt the technologies, but once they adapt, we know that they're all secure, right? That's one philosophy that we tell people to do. The second one is you always be paranoid about it, that somebody is going to breach into your infrastructure, your devices, your information in the next minute, next day, next week, right? No matter how much you have done it, you always be paranoid about somebody is always attacking you, right? So that's a mindset that we expect our customers to have it, and that's what I would expect my leadership team to have it in as they are building the systems, either for our organization or for our customers.
Well, that word, the paranoid word, just reminds me of a book, Only the Paranoid Survive.
Yeah.
The founder of Intel had put together the book. So it just reminds me of that, Ram. Okay, let me now add another question for Kishan, because that word paranoid also very important for the Honeywell part and the kind of business it runs. Kishan, the way you have devices across locations, across businesses, across industrial locations, how do you approach it? How are you, if I may use the word, paranoid about it in ensuring the security of it?
Right. Yes, we do. Like you said, a lot of devices. We play big in the OT world. So we, at the hardware level, so there's more processes that we have identified, right? So at the hardware level, we have identified what minimum security you need to implement in a device at the chip level, etc. Right. So we have a good hardware qualification process, hardware security reviews that we go through to ensure that the device is secure. Secondly, a lot of our networks, OT networks, they're not directly connected to the internet. So there are proprietary protocols that are used, etc. And we have come up with the network architectures, reference kind of architectures that our customers should implement, let's say in a building or a plant. And if we are connecting that to the cloud, we have built gateways, which can talk to our cloud, and they again are built to our security baseline standards. And they're hardened in the sense that you cannot actually log into the gateway. There is no user interface. There are no administrative APIs to connect to the gateway. It's all managed directly from the cloud. So, and every device that's connected to the cloud, we have an authentication mechanism. We have to be an authenticated device. We have a way to, whenever I talk, this goes off, I don't know why. But there's a way to provision the device remotely so that we know that it's an Honeywell authenticated device that's communicating to our cloud. So there are a lot of architectural and technical things that are built in. But a lot of it is also how you build a defensive depth. So a lot of these devices are not directly connected to the net. They get aggregated through the gateway. And then the gateway only has outbound connections. So there's no way you're opening any threat surface in a customer's network, right? And there's usually firewalls between these various levels. So we have architecture patterns. We follow the Purdue model. If you're aware, if you're familiar with that, the L1 to L5 network model, and this IEC 62443 practices. So there are industry standards around this that we kind of leverage, follow to secure our devices. But then there's more to what devices that we do. We also have a whole bunch of cloud-based services. And I saw a question around, can defense applications or federal applications be in the cloud? So yes, we do have, it depends, right? So even on the cloud, we can leverage something like a Gov Cloud, go through FedRAMP certifications, have a Department of Defense kind of certification for cloud-based solutions. So we also are looking at those kinds of standards, which will enable us to even serve other like federal and defense kind of customers of ours. And talking about devices, again, we have devices on the aircraft, right? So we have a disconnected way of communicating with the device. So there are different practices that we've learned over the years that we've implemented. And we are modernizing it now based on some of the newer standards, practices, etc.
Kishan, the word cloud-based services, it reminds me how it can get very overwhelming for a lot of customers, especially not understanding IT and how the whole ecosystem works. So maybe Aditya, you can help us understand when the pandemic hit and the entire digital supply chain came into picture. How do companies make sure they tell their customers that the best practices are followed? How do they do that?
Namrata, know that I think many of us and many of our customers, as we deal with external customers a lot, right? They were caught off guard, right, when it happened. And frankly, the first week was terrible for the customers, right? They were just scrambling upon to get going when things were all came to stop, right? And we have seen that there are customers who basically got some software. So there are customers who were more innovating in terms of putting those controls and cleaning things up. I think the companies who were already following certain best practices were able to resume things quicker and faster. for sure, right? But over a period of time, the customers got them all things, all those practices in place. They were the customers who basically invested a lot in terms of providing that secure remote access. They were able to pull in those virtual instances, and they were able to get those things get into the enterprise system in a secure manner. So this is definitely one of the things what happened around it. And in fact, Namrata, if you allow me, let me also take. There was an interesting topic which was going on around when we say supply chain, or from a talent standpoint as well. See, as a Quest, we are India's the largest private employer in terms of headcount, and as we speak today, we are 4 lakh plus people across IT and non-IT. And then, as a cybersecurity service provider as well, we have been dealing with that talent issue as well. Because the security talents are kind of, the market is going crazy, right? It's becoming very non-sustainable. I think my fellow panelists from Wellspun spoke about it. Yes, it's up to the experts to do it, and I think we have really seen it as opportunity. Where because of this work from home, the tier 2, the talent from tier 2 cities actually now getting tapped up. Right. We are seeing there have been institutes set up where those resources are getting training, and then I think it will augur well for this entire industry, and it's really a democratization what's happening in terms of security market as well. And we really focus upon building the employee experience, where when you are really getting a challenge at level N, basically you are getting N-1 and get them into a stringent training to get them to the speed onto it, right? So this is another thing, not just as we as a service provider, but definitely there are customers who are also working on it, and I think this is one of the another aspect which I wanted to touch upon it, Namrata.
Thank you. I mean, wow, a lot of insights here. Definitely very overwhelming to hear all these details. But I think we've dissected the subject well. It's time to maybe John help us understand. When you speak to these companies, we've understood the subject, we've understood what's happening and where the issue is. Now let's talk about future. How are companies preparing themselves for the challenges that are going to be coming up, 2022 and from there on?
Yeah, so I think this hybrid working is here to stay. That's fair to say. I think a lot of companies who resisted to doing any kind of remote work in the past have realized that it is possible to have people be productive and still meet the business goals going forward. And I think I'm glad that Manu brought up Zero Trust. Those of you who've seen me on previous panels know I'm a big fan as well. And I think that's from the protection side. I think you're going to see a lot of people moving towards that, at least having that as a goal for the next couple of years to implement, because the Zero Trust really is the way. Speaking of how do you build a trust environment, it's kind of ironic that we're using the term Zero Trust, but it's a way of actually enabling your organization to have better visibility, better context, and again, better implementation of things like security defaults and security perimeters, while also enabling the business. And I heard a couple of the other panelists mention this as well, which is really encouraging to hear, because too often, there's this perception that security stops things from happening. And I guess in the sense, things like firewalls, yeah, the products themselves do stop bad things from happening, but they also enable good things from happening. And I would challenge people who say security is a stopper to say, well, if you have a cyber attack on your network and you get everything encrypted, that's going to stop your business as well. So security really plays a part in keeping that moving. And so having an enabler like Zero Trust helps you allow people to go forward and work in a flexible environment, but in doing so in a way where you're now wrapping the trust and you're wrapping the context of security around the user itself. And if one user gets compromised, it doesn't compromise the entire organization. So as we move forward through 2022 and beyond, I think that's the direction security is going to be taking. And then let's not forget the cyber criminals who are always trying to circumvent the security, right? They're always trying to abuse our trust, as many panelists have said already. And some of the things that they're doing right now is they're employing different ways of dragging us into their net of victims. In the past, there was a lot of this sort of spray and pray activity where you just send payloads out to everybody, hoping that just by orders of magnitude, you'd get some victims. Now what we're seeing is actually some more pinpoint targeting. We saw a couple of groups, specifically Gootloader and BazaarLoader, where they were doing sort of a pre-filtering. They would actually select their victims based on a characteristic. So they would poison Google search results, and then based on your machine type, the operating system you were using, some of the applications that you probably had installed, then they would choose among that pool and make you a victim out of that. And so there's a sort of reverse targeting going on as well. And so this sort of hybrid attack scenario needs a hybrid defense. And so back to defense again, we're going to need to the talent shortage that was just being talked about, we're going to need to have the machines help us as well. And so AI is going to get more and more infused into the processes that we do, not only from the defense perspective, but also from helping the humans just be more effective at their jobs. And one of the things that we're working really hard at Sophos on is this automated SOC idea, where we're going to use artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning to help the analysts that are on the front lines, that are dealing with this on a day-to-day basis, make better decisions about what they need to prioritize to keep the organization safe and secure. So I think you're going to see a lot of shifting on the game board here of the attackers and the defenders sort of getting into position. But I think if we have a plan, we can actually make a better defense going forward.
Okay, that's an interesting point for the discussion, how much to use AI. So because we have one question coming, Prakash Prajapati joins us. And well, Prakash, if we can have us, if we can have you on the video. Okay, Prakash joins us. Prakash, what's your question?
Good evening, everybody. So I'm glad to part of this discussion. So my simple question is that, so we are talking about the zero trust. So what I felt during a zero trust, most of us are doing a whitelisting to avoid the business downtime. So either the whitelisting of application or the communication, which may lead us to make a vulnerable setup. So is there any technology available so that they will learn the whitelisting being utilized efficiently, and we can come over the situation where whitelisting cannot spoil my overall architecture design?
Okay. Let's take that question first. Ram, if you're comfortable, and then probably Manu as well, a quick answers to that question, please.
I won't have a specific answer to it. The fact that you're whitelisting some service or your third-party thing, you trusting them, right? That's how you whitelist it. So make sure that you audit them before even you apply any technology, and make sure that it's a trustworthy, right? But from technology point of view, I would let other panel members, Manu or somebody, do.
Sure, Manu?
Yeah, sure. That's a very interesting question, and I see where Prakash is standing as a security professional when he is forced to whitelist things, right? And whitelisting has always been the Achilles heel of security apparatus of any organization. We say we want to control, but then we pass these things under the carpet, which will eventually get detected by somebody with a malicious intention and will get exploited. Now, how do we connect to this whitelist? And I probably will refrain from using a product name or anything for as a solution to it in the context of this conversation. Otherwise, I might be doing a selling here. But to answer your question, there are products that can help you in that space. Let me leave it at that. But then looking at a product to solve that whitelisting problem is not what I would recommend. Zero trust is more of a strategic approach that organizations needs to adopt in its framework, and that would involve bringing in certain new tools, or it may be looking re-architecting the way re-architecting the way your systems are configured and managed, right from the application layer to the far end from where end users are accessing it, right? Adopting a zero trust requires you to discover what are the blind spots in your environment. What is the basic assumed trust in your organization? Are you still reliant on your perimeter as a security? Do you still rely a lot on VPN for people to come in? And once people come in through the VPN, do you kind of give them unlimited trust, right?
Sure.
Like how it used to be, and all those things. And how effectively have you implemented principles of least privileges? So these are the things that would really help you move towards zero trust. And the biggest mistake probably organizations would do is to think about it as, okay, bring in another tool and solve the puzzle.
Okay, point taken. And thank you so much, Prakash, for coming in and being a part of the conversation and raising this important point. Time now for the next poll. And as always, we request you to take part in this. Just express your opinion on this poll that's coming up on your screen. There you go. Which factor among the following could impact information security risk most negatively? Now, as we mentioned earlier, you have to make one choice out of the 4, and the results will show up in just a couple of minutes. Just to point out again, all the speakers and both Namrata and I, we don't get to be part of this polling process. So it is your choice, your opinion that counts here. When you choose one of them, that'll pop up on the screen and you'll get an answer to what is the response to the question. We've been streaming on multiple platforms, but the ones here, they can answer this poll. So it's good if you can answer the question and we get a response to that. And that's a quick poll we have, and look at the response we have. Well, quite a few people have participated. So the highest 30-odd%, slow security capability update. So if you're not updating enough of the security patches and security detailing, that's what is the biggest factor. And accountability of the processes that Manu just spoke about also a little while ago, that is important. So they two of them, they stand out from among the topics mentioned there in the poll. Thank you indeed for participating in that poll, and let's move on, Namrata, with the questions.
Thank you so much, Ashutosh, and thank you, speakers. We have one very interesting question here, trying to understand how are we going to build futuristic technologies? Now, talking about AI, talking about cloud-based services, how is it that we are going to have futuristic technologies that can help us? Maybe we can have John help us here.
Sorry, couldn't find the mute button. Yeah, the future is all about enabling and automation. I think it's about helping humans be more efficient in their jobs, but also being more effective, so that as people are looking to secure organizations, they're doing so in a way that isn't overburdening them. And back to the talent shortage, this is something that is, I think, is affecting a lot of people. It's the amount of work that needs to be done to secure an organization and then follow up on all the alerts that get generated can be quite daunting. And I think that the future is that automation piece where we can help people move from pre-implementation to post-implementation to monitoring in a way that's a lot more effective and efficient for them. And AI is going to do that for us. That there's no doubt. AI is one of the powers of AI is just its ability to crunch through vast amounts of data and give us results. And just if I can address the question that was asked previously about zero trust and if there's things that AI can do, this also answers your question, Namrata. There are ways that when you're analyzing your network in a zero trust context, that you can understand what the baseline is and use AI to actually start to spot anomalies, even little anomalies, like things like all of a sudden John is logging in from a different location than he was every other day this week, right? It might be tough for an analyst to pick that out if they're simply looking at the logs that are scrolling through on their screen. But it'll be really easy for AI to do something like that. So the future of security is going to be rethinking and re-architecting how we do security, which is again, taking the perimeter away from the old model, which was wrap it around the organization, to now wrapping it around the user and adding that context of what they're doing, but then also adding automation and deep learning into the mix so that we can be more efficient and effective at doing the job of every day-to-day security, right? Understanding when there's a problem and then going out and threat hunting for any additional issues that might be lying in wait on your network. And to me, that's the direction that we're going to be seeing in the next, at least in the next couple of years.
Okay, it's very important because, John, because you're speaking about the direction that we're going to see, because we're still battling with 2022. 2021 has gone by. And so we want to understand some of the better processes. And Ram, if I may start with you about trying to understand what should be some of those learnings from the last 2 years, particularly the last 2 years, and so that companies can build on it over the next maybe 2022 and beyond as well.
I think one of the foremost important thing is when we try to have our employees in a hybrid mode, work from home, work from office, that hybrid model would be there in near future. I don't think it is going back to 100% work from office. That's not going to happen. Okay? So as an organization, one needs to build the capability to operate either 100% remote or 100% work from office or anywhere in between. As a capability, a secure environment, one needs to build those capabilities, right? That's the most important aspect of it. So when you peel those layers of what are these capabilities, being able to have a very good high-end, the security for these end devices, but also having access to all of the critical information that is needed for employee to be productive, right? That's the other side of it. So making sure that we balance our policies and our technology implementations, everything around it to make sure that employee is productive, but also the secure, right? I think that's the most important thing. Second thing is, as the numbers, moment we moved to work from home back in March 2020, when we are looking into number of, every month I do a review of how things went within our organization. The number of attempts that are on our network and our systems is about 4-fold within that month. Right? That kind of indicates you that the attacks are going to continue to be up and up, as much as the technology capabilities are increasing for the defense, but for the attackers also they're going up. Right? So we should assume that the attacks will be much more sophisticated as we go along, and get ready to defend those things. And I think that's one of the lessons that we learned, that the attacks will be more and more sophisticated, and attackers would have much cheaper solutions as much as the other side would have it. So therefore, both the quality of the attacks and also the volume of attacks will be up. So that's going to be there, and then we need to be ready for that. That's another one. And the third one is that earlier it was easy for us to operate. You manage about 20-25 offices. Everything is easy. Now, when 25,000 employees are working from home, it's as good as managing those 25,000 offices, right? That's complex that comes in. But the most important thing is, earlier somebody would walk in and then take charge of the end device. Now we can no longer do that. We need to make sure that we have those remote capabilities to do things differently. I think all of these parts that recognizing that we are at a war, and then we are going to be attacked, and then making sure that we build the capabilities to defend ourselves is the most important lesson.
Attacks are going to keep coming. That's what he has to say, and I completely agree. So let's look at now. We know attackers are coming. Attackers are becoming increasingly sophisticated. We are sitting here, a team of experts talking about this subject. We cannot assume attackers are not, 2 steps ahead of us. So let's talk about that. Let's assume the attack has happened and the crisis is here. How do companies tackle and respond in a scenario of crisis? Maybe Aditya, if you can throw some light here, and then I can have some insights from Alok as well. So Aditya, you can go first.
So Namrata, you may have to repeat your last line.
I meant to ask, let's assume the attack has happened and the crisis is here. We've talked about how to build futuristic solution and be prepared. But what if the attack has happened and you haven't been able to avoid it? How do companies prepare themselves, or how do companies respond to that?
Okay, yeah. Thanks for asking, guys. In fact, I was just scrolling through no few of the question, and one of the question raised by, I think, Karan. Somewhere it connects to this. And what he said is, prevention is better than cure, right? Still the companies are getting breached. And if we allude to it, see, prevention is definitely better than cure. The challenge what comes is when we are overly relying on the prevention alone, right? And this is going to lead us to the future approach as well, that you have got the technologies to prevent, but considering that you are not ready for that eventuality, which might come, because we all understand there's nothing 100% security, and you are not ready with that your detection layer, and then eventually the incident response and the business continuity plan and all, and here is going to be the problem, right? As we are moving into it, I think there is, and this is what the last 2 years have taught us, there's nothing permanent. Something can happen any fine day, and then we'll be all guarded, unaware. And this is where the processes, this is where the readiness for that something might happen is going to be very, very important. And obviously, somewhere, Ram has spoken about, and then John has spoken about in terms of the moving, those technologies moving, towards the AI part of it, right? Where they really allow us to be more efficient. As the speed is going to be very, very important. It's not just about that we are able to address the threat, but it is also about how quickly are we able to address the threat, right? So I think these are few of the aspects, at least the takeaway for me for last year. As we are going and talking to our customers, as we are preparing ourselves, and this is how I think the industry is going to move.
Okay, great. So how quickly are we able to respond? That's what his take is. And how about you, Alok? What does your experience tell you?
Yeah, again, very interesting. So I'll tell you, see, not everybody is ready, right? I mean, and nobody wants to be ready for this, but then they have to, it's about only a matter of time somebody will be hit through a ransomware attack or a major cyber attack, data breach. What we recommend is having periodic tabletop exercises where you actually simulate the entire experience as if you have actually hit into a scenario. All right, could be data breach, could be ransomware attack, could be, as simple as somebody calling and saying, I have got the user ID password of your executives. In fact, this is not a hypothetical, but an actual scenario which happened with Sensex 10, top 10 company, and the CEOs had to call us and then we had to investigate. All right. So
sorry, you're suggesting a fire drill for
yes. So a cyber range simulation activity, a tabletop activity that needs to be done periodically, where everybody comes and experiences as if it's a live event which is happening, and only then they get to see the gravity. They actually get to respond. You have to have your legal, HR, marketing, CXOs, everybody involved, so that they know what roles they have to play. I'll give you a simple example, like when the ransomware events happen, and we suggest a lot of organizations not to pay, but then still have somebody who you make as your first responder who's going to negotiate with the ransomware attackers. Not that you have to pay, but you still need to have in your playbook the authority who is going to be designated to respond, to negotiate, all right, and then, all right, fictitiously have an amount of money, I mean, that you can negotiate. So there are a lot of tactics also that we use, right? I mean, it's a part of our response plan. So simulation exercise is very important, and I would very strongly recommend organizations to embrace.
Okay, that's quite a bit of challenge because, I must mention that we have some questions that are coming in, and we'd like to maybe ask Kishan for this question. Kishan, I don't know if you'd like to take this, but this is a challenge with companies. Cybercrime insurance, this is from Apurva Kumar, who's a company secretary from Gurgaon in Haryana, and he says cybercrime insurance cost is huge once ransom attack of past is reported. How to mitigate the risk in such cases where the cost is effective? I don't know if you'd be the right person.
So yeah, that's not really in my area of expertise.
Okay. Ram, can I, because you'd be dealing with The top question can ask you.
I also see Manu smiling here, so I'm guessing yes.
I think probably I'll pass it to Alok, but I'm telling you, there is no easy way to negotiate with an insurer, right? So Alok, you know how those negotiations go.
Alok, maybe since you spoke of negotiation.
Yes. So again, I think, these are very resonating topics. In fact, yesterday I was having a conversation with the CISO, and then they were invoking their cyber insurance because they have got hit by ransomware. And the insurers have come and said that, you need to be doing A, B, C, D, and then I need a Big Four to go do a neutral audit, as if to make sure that it is not something which because of your fundamental mistake has happened. All right. So I would say now cyber insurance is quite predominant. A lot of organizations have obtained it. In fact, we recommend very strongly to a lot of our customers, clients that have cyber insurance. And we also ask them, like, cyber insurance has to be linked with their MSSP providers with certain SLAs, and also it's an emerging area. It's not that easy, but then cyber insurance, yes, it's available from certain parties. I would not say from or certain vendors. It's not like available from everyone. There are certain catches. To avail cyber insurance, you have to have a certain degree of cyber security already in the organization.
Sure.
All right. It's not like without having any cyber security, you just go and avail that insurance. So one has to strike the balance, and it's a very emerging area, very strongly recommended. And please go and take one, just like how you take a life insurance.
Okay. So one more question. So Manu, you wanted to make a point, please.
Yeah. So in addition to Alok said, that's an interesting question. If I heard the question right, the premiums are very high once you have had an incident like a ransomware. So often when it comes to cyber, we don't draw parallels to the physical world. If you have a pre-existing disease, your health insurance premium is going to be very high, right? And it works out in this world as well. And that, you can draw these kind of parallels on every aspect of cyber, Now, as Alok said, cybersecurity insurance nowadays is a must for every organization, just like how individuals would take a term insurance or life insurance. Every organizations must have it. And the earlier you take it before you actually get the disease, the better for you. That's point one. Point two, if you do get attacked and then you are going to do it as an afterthought, then I would imagine re-establishing, it comes down to a certain level of negotiation with the underwriter, and what they are looking for is to adjust their risk, right? You may have had a past incident, but how well can you prove to them that you have learned the lessons from there? And then how have you put enough controls satisfactorily and demonstrably in place that it's not gonna, you have reduced the probability of that happening again. So if your insurer is confident, one insurer now needs to get more people to buy his insurance policy, so it's a business for him. Second is, how do you prove that you have learned from that's your best chance to get your premiums to the lowest, but never expect it to be as low as what you would have got had you not had the incident.
Okay, this is a interesting conversation. Okay, take another question from that's come from Rajesh Ganju, and Rajesh says, what is more vulnerable, network or data stores? How to prevent data if someone crashes into the network? Piyush, would you like to have a quick answer to that?
Yeah, I think in terms of vulnerability, so there are firewalls and all which protect our networks. But I think when I look at it broadly, there are two parts here. So when you talk about information or data, right? One is there is a part when you're creating or you're producing the information or data, right? And the other aspect is that how you're basically consuming it. From a context of an enterprise, when you talk about producing the data, it is happening either in the systems, and there is a parallel part where a lot of data is being produced in a form of MISs, databases, and all in individual machines. People are used to Excel. There's a lot of work which is happening on individual laptops. So when we look at it into totality, the part where the data is being made into the systems, it is residing into the servers, that is a little bit easier for us to protect, from a technology perspective. We talked about, there are multiple aspects of building the information technology layers at an asset level, at a configuration level, at patch level. We're talking about cloud, network, security patches, endpoint patches. All those things are there where we can continuously monitor it, right? But then there's another part, how you're going to basically protect the data which is being produced at the source itself, at the machines, right? So there are multiple frameworks. We are currently looking at a framework of what we call as DLP, the Data Leakage Prevention Framework, where we are having the endpoint security backups which are being done. We are also looking at a continuous scanning of the data which is being produced, so that whatever the information is being shared from the assets of the company to the outside world, we do a real-time scanning. And that is where on the background, we talked about, we have not reached to the level of AI, that level of sophistication, but at least there are those tagging which are today manually done in terms of identifying, what are the data points that we need to monitor if they're moving out of the company network through emails and stuff like that. And also controlling how people are coming and logging into their devices by multiple authentication factors. So I think these are the two aspects, and there's a lot of technology play which is again evolving in these areas. So we also look at even in the source systems, when our employees are working on their machines and all, there are multiple security level patches and programs which are running to make sure what they're browsing, how much they're browsing, so that at least we control the spread of the things there. So yeah, so I think a lot of work happening on the endpoint part because of the whole hybrid model coming in. Network side, we are still okay.
Thank you, Piyush. Data and how users are using it. Thank you for summarizing that. Aditya, you had your hand raised a while back. I just wanted to quickly check if you have a point to make.
It's missed now.
Okay.
Okay. I think I was just trying to add to what Manu and Alok said in terms of cyber insurance, right? And what Manu was saying to how do you really demonstrate? And actually, I was just trying to connect back to what I said in my starting remarks, saying now the third-party vendors who are kind of putting up score to the overall security posture is one of the ways where it rules out the subjectivity out of it. Now you have got a score, and if you are basically, other than what Manu said in terms of demonstrating what else you have done to take care of what earlier, and if you are able to showcase that trend, obviously try to get it towards the upside of it. And if you are able to show that, then it might help in terms of negotiating your insurance.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Aditya. I think we are very near to closing now. We've discussed problem, crisis, response, everything. And I think I'd like to invite my friend John here to help us summarize that and make it less overwhelming for our audience. John, the floor is all yours.
Great. So firstly, I'd like to thank the audience for participating and listening to the discussion today, as well as my fellow panelists for a lot of really good insights into security, and obviously our wonderful host for asking us some great questions. And what I took from this discussion is a few things. One of them is visibility is key. And when we think about things like Log4j, visibility means one thing, but when we think about an organization, it means another. So Log4j, visibility means knowing where all your assets are and where all the pieces of software are that might include things like Log4j in them and being able to remediate them. But also stakeholder buy-in is part of visibility, right? Understanding, having the executives, especially at the really high levels of the company, understand why you're doing this, why are you implementing security in these ways is important. And that's that stakeholder buy-in that gives you visibility into the entirety of the organization. And then defaults matter. And we had a poll question that kind of sort of alluded to that a little bit in terms of patching and password management. And these are all defaults. These are all the foundational things that I heard my panelists talk about. Now, building solid security foundations rely on defaults. They rely on putting your best security foot forward, which means prioritizing security, right? There's this buzzword in the industry right now called shift left, which is basically means get in front of the problem, right? Make sure that you address it before it becomes an issue. And adding application security at the end of the project is not going to make your application secure. You need to do it at the beginning of the project, or whatever you're doing, whatever product or service you're putting out there, or whatever network you're building, prioritize security. And reframe about how you think about security, right? It's about enablement. It's about making sure that you keep the business moving forward and keep it doing what it needs to be doing in order to, make more money and make better products and provide better services. And ZTNA is definitely the future. This is how we're going to accomplish a lot of this, by including AI, by including automation, by understanding the context of the business, and just making it more secure overall moving forward. So again, thank you to everybody. If I'll just one little plug out there that we just released our threat report recently. So sophos.com/threat report. If you want to read about some of these stories about how the bad guys are trying to get into our networks, then go to that. And again, thank you. And I'll pass it back to you, Ashutosh.
Thanks so much, John. Thank you indeed for being with us. And the more we talk about it, the more we share, that's important for the industry. And one thing that kind of struck me, if I were to give one headline for the conversation, one part of the conversation, if you need maybe 100% security or near 100% security, zero trust is important. So that's the kind of situation possibly we are in as far as the security is concerned, and creating that 24/7 trust. Gentlemen, and of course, I must thank my colleague Namrata as well. But first, Ram Singapalli, Piyush Rajiv Ajmani, Kishan Manjunath, Manu Patumana, Aditya Vardhan, Alok Dani, and John Shear. Thank you very much for taking out the time to talk about this. And as I said, the more we talk, the better it'll be for the industry, for the community, and everyone. On behalf of Namrata and I, thank you indeed for taking out the time.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.